The weekly Cybercrime and Business Podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact of their business, and proactively address threats head-on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to HackSurfer's Weekly Podcast. Today is Friday, the 13th of February, 2015. Joining us today on the panel, we have Michael Fell, Surfwatch Labs data analyst, Jeff Peters, the editor of HackSurfer, and I'm Matt Leifus. I write for HackSurfer. Stay tuned after the podcast for Jeff's interview with Andrew Chanin. Chanin is the CEO of PureFunds, and they talk about how the company launched the world's first exchange-traded fund to invest in cybersecurity stocks back in November. Starting off today, guys, I thought we could get into some top news over the week. First of all, the top new trending target was Chipotle Mexican Grill. I'm sure all of you guys have eaten there before. I know I certainly have. The big news with the company was their Twitter account was taken over by a hacker or possibly hackers. Whoever hacked into this Twitter account, they posted several, very distasteful, racist, anti-government, and anti-Obama messages throughout the page, and even put a swastika up. I mean, it's just made the Twitter page look really bad. The company immediately found it. They erased everything and issued an apology, but that was the big news for Chipotle, maybe just a little bit of embarrassment for the company. And then we had Intuit. They're the tax creators behind TurboTax. For a little while this week, the company actually stopped processing all state tax returns when it was discovered there was a increase of fraudulent claims. They have since resumed processing these tax returns. However, it just kind of brings, to light how people are able to obtain information to fraudulently, start filing a tax return. We have seen this in other instances. I believe it was the Utah State Tax Commission also saw some of this. So, guys, it's tax season. We need to make sure that we're protecting our data because hackers and cyber criminals and criminals of any sort are going to try to steal your data and get money any way they can.
And that being said, that TurboTax does have the capability of encrypting or password protecting any sort of income tax return information that you do save on your computer. And it's also highly recommended that you keep on backing up your computer in the case of something happening.
And one stat that really surprised me, I was reading this NBC News story yesterday, and it says that tax refund fraud is expected to hit $21 billion by 2016, up from $6.5 billion just 2 years ago, according to the IRS. So those are pretty shocking numbers, I thought.
Yeah, that is a huge number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then the other story, the Chipotle Twitter account hijack, I thought that was interesting because even though, account hijackings, I think, get way more attention than they deserve. I mean, obviously that was the most discussed story this week. It is interesting looking at the Surfwatch Labs data. I was in there this morning just seeing, how many distinct targets there were tied to account hijackings. And back in November, there was only 23 distinct targets. And then December, it jumped to 35. January, it jumped to 44. And now here in February, we're only halfway through the month and we're already at 23. So, if we see the same amount in the second half of the month as we did in the first half of the month, it'll grow yet again for the fourth month in a row. And I think there was quite a few other kind of account hijacking stories in the news too.
In the last week, a group associating itself with ISIS in the Middle East, the Cyber Caliphate, accessed the Twitter accounts of Newsweek, a veterans group, and a local Maryland news station. Most notably on the Newsweek feed, the group threatened the Obama family, saying that making inappropriate comments towards Michelle Obama and the girls. That was very interesting. And as Jeff said, a lot of these sorts of attacks get a great amount of attention, even though the Cyber Caliphate, I believe, had access to the Newsweek Twitter feed for 14 minutes. But one of the leading headlines on the nightly news that night was about this Newsweek Twitter attack, as they claim it. In addition to the cyber caliphate, Anonymous has also started targeting social media and email addresses associated with ISIS too. According to their claims, they've targeted 800 Twitter accounts, 12 Facebook pages, and over 50 email addresses.
The other big news that's happening today is President Obama. He's heading out to California to the Stanford Cybersecurity Summit, and he's expected to sign an executive order today.
He's expected to announce executive action intended to improve how information on cyber threats is shared between the private sector and the Department of Homeland Security. There is legislation in the Senate right now that was introduced, but for the last about 2 years, I follow this very closely. For around the last 2 years, there's been a lot of disagreement and deadlock regarding any sort of threat information sharing legislation. So the president's decided to use his executive power to push something through. What's very interesting about the security summit is that several tech company executives decided not to attend. And a lot of in the media, there's a New York Times article specifically say this highlights the rift between the government and tech companies over government surveillance. So I thought that was a very interesting development.
Yeah, and I'm always, and I think it's great. I mean, we've seen, the White House, our government especially really started to take an active interest in cybersecurity as of late. I mean, they've passed several laws now, and, I'm of the mind that government really kind of complicates the heck out of, everything they touch. That's just my personal opinion. So I'll be interested to see how this turns out in the future. If it does indeed just kind of complicate things more than they already are.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because I've been asking a few people I've talked to this week, a few of the vendors and stuff that we interview for HackSurfer, and I got a few emails, and everyone generally seems to support it. So I was kind of surprised reading the news today, like in this New York Times article. You got this guy named Herb Lynn. Says he spent 20 years working on cyber issues at the National Academy of Sciences. And he says there's an enormous degree of hostility between Silicon Valley and the government, and the relationship's been poisoned and it's not going to recover anytime soon. Obviously I'm kind of on the outside of that world. I got the impression that it wasn't quite as bad as he's making it out to be.
I think there's a lot of skepticism regarding motivations and intentions regarding the government with technology and stuff. And I think a lot of it's fueled by good old Ed Snowden and the NSA revelations.
One other interesting story that came up this week is IBM did a study about dating apps, which is kind of relevant, with Valentine's Day coming up this weekend. So I don't know, Matt, if you want to maybe fill us in on what you found out about that.
IBM did this study, and it involved a lot of dating apps. And we thought, this is kind of appropriate to talk about, being as Valentine's Day tomorrow. So happy Valentine's Day, everyone. And there were a lot of vulnerabilities that were found within these apps. And I think, it's not just with dating apps, which I think will be important to point out. There's a lot of applications on a phone that are at risk, are very vulnerable to hacking and things like that. But one of the things they found in this study was 26 out of the 41 dating apps that they analyzed on an Android mobile platform had either a medium or high severity vulnerabilities. And one of the problems we run into is a lot of these applications that are on phones have certain accesses, and an example here is 48% of the 41 popular dating apps that they analyzed had access to users' billing information that was saved on their device. So it could cause a lot of potential problems if some of these applications were compromised and hacked into it. These applications seem to have a lot of access to personal information on your phone, and it wouldn't be quite a stretch for some of the information to be compromised. And that's kind of a big deal.
And what really stood out to me in reading the IBM blog is 50% of the enterprises that they analyzed had an employee which had installed one of the popular dating applications. on their device, whether it was a bring your own device or an employee device. So it's kind of an important thing to talk about for businesses because, that's just looking at, I guess, one aspect, kind of like Matt said, is dating applications. So if you look at all the applications out there, there's probably even more potential vulnerabilities. So IBM had a few tips in there. One of them is to make sure that you're only allowing them to download from authorized app stores. Most of the malware and stuff we see comes from people downloading from, unauthorized sites. Make sure that you educate employees about application security and then have a plan in place so that you can act immediately if a device does get compromised. So that's just something to definitely keep in mind as, more employees are using these devices, is just that is another area of risk that you have to consider. Yeah, that's it for the discussion this week. Coming up, we have an interview with Andrew Chanin. He's the CEO of PureFunds. They launched a cybersecurity fund back in November, which just surpassed $200 million in assets. I was reading some press releases, and it said that you guys started this fund just 2 months ago, and it already has more than $180 million in assets. So I guess I'm just kind of curious why you guys decided to start it and how the first 2 months have been going.
Yeah, so actually, the launch date was November 14th, 2012. Actually, no, November 12th, 2014. So the fund has been out for just a little under 3 months. And to even update that stat for you, so as of last night, it became official that the fund had actually crossed the $200 million mark, which is a pretty big milestone. But to backtrack some more, this is a concept that so my partners and I have been interested in launching for a while. And the index was actually that the fund tracks was started to be, the building of it began, about 2 years ago even. So although the fund just launched this past November, it's actually been an idea that's been, a long time in the making. And, it's not as simple as just saying, okay, I want to make an ETF. Okay, let's turn this thing on. There's certainly a registration process with the SEC and a whole bunch of other things that need to fall in line before you can IPO your fund. But yes, so essentially we created the world's first cybersecurity ETF. It's based on the ISE, it's Igloo SAM Exchange, the International Securities Exchange. Off of their index, the ISE Cybersecurity Index. So, what we had kind of realized was that there is this growing industry known as the cybersecurity industry, and that, there are many companies involved in this space, and we had seen more companies IPOing, and a lot of the companies in the space also growing. And it seemed like a really interesting opportunity to create this fund that seemed, in our opinion, was going to be an even more important integral industry in the future. And that's, I think, kind of the dream of any ETF company, is to create that idea that when that fund launches, people are already interested in that idea and can flock to investing in that fund. And it makes it much easier to do that when there isn't another fund already doing exactly what you're trying to do. So we saw this as an opportunity to essentially, create the world's first ETF that could allow investors to, instead of having to choose individual stocks in the cybersecurity space, to, with the click of, the buy button just once, could purchase exposure currently in the fund to now 31 companies from around the globe.
I'm wondering maybe if you could list some of those companies that are in the fund. I mean, obviously on the podcast we interview, a lot of companies like Proofpoint, Fortinet, FireEye I know is in there. Could you just maybe give us a little kind of broad view of what's in the fund?
Certainly. All the names that you mentioned. There's also Palo Alto Networks. There's Splunk. There's KeyW. There's Symantec and Juniper. And, essentially, if you look at, you can go to our website even, and on the hack tab, you can actually see all the holdings as of the previous night, which could be an interesting tool for people that really want to dig down into it. But essentially, the index was broken down into two sub-industries. So on one side, we have the infrastructure companies, and on the other, we have the service companies. And if you look at it, the infrastructure companies are the predominant companies in the cybersecurity industry, and that was kind of classified as companies that are developing and selling cybersecurity hardware or software, where the service companies were those providing consulting services, typically to government agencies and corporations. So for some of your audience that's really into the space, they'll probably see many companies, that publicly traded companies that they're familiar with in the fund. And interestingly, through the fund, you're actually getting exposure to some companies that may be difficult to get exposure to. The fund does have decent weightings to Israeli companies, and there are positions in Japanese, South Korean, Polish companies from the Netherlands as well as Finland. So there's a pretty diverse geographic spread in the basket, and we think it's providing investors with a pretty unique opportunity to get access to this constantly evolving space.
I was reading a few articles talking about how you guys saw some growth, following the Sony breach, which obviously got a bunch of news, and then said you guys were up, shares were up 2% following the Anthem breach recently. Just wondering if you guys get a lot of, attention and kind of investment following these big breaches and all the media noise that they create.
It's kind of the dream that when you launch a fund that the media actually cares about it, and not that we celebrate some of these significant and could be very, very negative events, but it does happen to be an area that the media does associate with these events, and part of that has to do with being the first fund that actually tracks this industry. So essentially, it could be viewed almost as a benchmark of what's happening in the cybersecurity industry. And just being that news outlets are constantly looking for new angles and new ways to discuss different stories and themes that are occurring, this was kind of an easy one for them to relate to. Not only were these events happening, but our cybersecurity fund happened to launch about 2 weeks before the Sony attack, and then as the Morgan Stanley event and the Anthem event happened, it's been of interest to them to point to the fund as a way to potentially play increased spending in the cybersecurity space. So typically when you launch a fund, you really have to go out and hit all those different media points to get them interested in the fund and to tell them the story. And this was actually one of those areas where, although we were doing that, it was one that we actually saw a lot of interest coming, the other direction, where people were reaching out to us, inquiring more information about the fund.
Yeah, this might be kind of a stupid question because I'm not too knowledgeable, on the whole financial side of things. But when you guys decided to sort of create this fund, a couple years ago, were you surprised that you'd be the first one, or just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this was something that was probably our biggest concern, and it is our biggest concern any time that we go about trying to launch a new fund. And we were a small company at the time, and there is the risk always of another player beating you to market. So this was an idea that, although we were extremely excited about it, it was one that we kept very tightly guarded until up until the actual launch. So, typically, there's more information about an upcoming fund launch, but we kept this one under wraps so that fewer people would know that it was coming. And fortunately, given the interest in the space, it was a successful strategy for this fund. Other people might want as much news and pent up demand and excitement for the fund leading up to the launch, but this was one that we thought could be a high priority for other people to bring out. And in the ETF industry, one of probably one of the most important parts of bringing out an ETF is that ability to be the first mover, to be first to market.
Wondering if you maybe have any insight into sort of like how the stock market overall reacts to breaches or cyber attacks, cyber events. Because that's something that we talk about quite a bit is, like I was looking just today, like Home Depot, they had a huge breach and their stocks had, grown quite a bit since then. Same with Sony, their breaches, despite, all the problems they've had, their stock's doing pretty well. I saw this morning that Anthem's kind of bouncing back already. So I guess, on one hand, like we see all this media attention and everyone kind of talking about these breaches and CEOs potentially, getting fired. And then at the same time, if you look at the stock market, it seems like maybe in a way it doesn't respond. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that in particular.
Yeah, one interesting thing that our index provider did was, they back tested the index, HXR. And, one thing that they had seen was typically on days where there were announcements of, a major new cyber breach, that index had, managed on many days to actually outperform the broader markets. So it does seem like there is some type of event-driven element to the, to this space. At the same time, when we were creating this fund, we weren't necessarily doing it, ahead of thinking of a specific event, but more so this growing theme of spending in the cybersecurity space. I think one of the things that has helped this significantly is that there were so many at the larger banks in the research departments last year, and especially for 2015, one of their top picks or top themes for the year is actually cybersecurity. And we'll talk to different research analysts at banks that cover this space or the broader software IT areas. And what they'll say is someone called and they were asking how do I invest in the cybersecurity space? Tell me about the industry a little bit. And, they'll go on for 45 minutes and they'll tell them about, the companies that they're following and the new technology that's coming out and the contracts that these companies are getting. 45 minutes, into this conversation, all this information, because it can be so technical, has gone completely over the person's head. And all they want to know is, what are the top three picks? Just tell me those, and that's how I'll get exposure to the space. And they'll say, I'll give you my favorite three picks in the space, but you're not really getting, that broad exposure to the cybersecurity industry. And it is one of those industries where, it's constantly evolving. We're not sure who, is going to have the best firewall come, 6 months from now. We don't know who's going to be the best at, notifying customers of suspicious events. This is going to be a constantly morphing battlefield as the world grows and things become more interconnected. And it's difficult to say who the winner of a cyber attack on company XYZ or on this utilities company or on this government agency, which is why we thought that playing this space through a diversified basket of companies that cover all different areas within the cybersecurity industry would be a way that investors might feel more comfortable investing, as opposed to trying to pick 1, 2, or 3 companies that they think might outperform the space.
I'm curious if you kind of see like any sort of like trends or kind of like within the fund of maybe certain categories within it that maybe are doing better, or that you see kind of you see the market kind of reacting to more positively?
Yeah, I mean, not to dig down, too granularly into it, but just last week, one of the companies in our fund, Excelis, it was announced that Harris Group was going to be acquiring them, and I'm not sure what it ended up closing at, but that one stock, Excelis, was up over 30% for the bulk of the trading day. So we saw some kind of this acquisition news come out, and lots of times in other industries when companies start looking to make acquisitions, typically these other companies in the space can start trading at a higher premium, knowing that other companies might be interested in this space. And I think it was just this morning, I believe HP had announced also that they had just acquired a private company to increase their footprint in the cybersecurity software space. So, I think one thing that we're just starting to see, this is, two companies in the cybersecurity space in the last 2 weeks, we're seeing acquisitions there. So that's something that I think is, a trend, that some larger companies looking to get access to the cybersecurity space. I think that's bringing some more eyeballs to the overall industry. And then, on a specific company basis, one name that I keep on seeing pop up whenever there's, a major breach is FireEye. And it seems that they're able to, for whatever reason, they've done a very good job at locking up contracts, especially in the wake of a cyber attack. So, I think this is going to be an industry where we're going to see, the winners constantly changing. But I think it has been interesting that, over the time since we launched the fund, we have seen some, significant contracts won by FireEye in the wake of, kind of negative cyber attack events.
Yeah, that's pretty much all the questions that I have, unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on before we leave.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I'd be happy to answer questions. If people are, interested, they can, come to our website and certainly, dig around and see some of the research that we're putting out. And, we're, kind of seeing what you're seeing and doing what you're doing too. We've realized that this is a really exciting industry, one that, people are still, trying to learn and, get a better understanding of. And, I think that what you're doing is great to, better educate people and, bring this sharing of ideas, because it is such an integral part of the growing global economy, and one that I think, it's unfortunate that it takes, significant cyber breaches and attacks and events to, put it on people's radar. But, I'm just happy to know that there's, people like you and others out there that are, trying to educate people and provide resources for them to, not only affect their investing, but their personal and in public and corporate safety and well-being as well.
Thanks for listening to this week's Cybercrime and Business Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you listen. And for more information, check out hacksurfer.com and surfwatchlabs.com.